So this will be a fun conversation as we explore deeper. Some of our most downloaded episodes are around tile and drain tile installation and the benefits that it has, but we haven't really pursued what do you do after you install the drain tile. So we're going to have an expert here sit on this round table. We're sitting at a round table here at the Drainage Expo. Assistant Professor, Extension Specialist in Nutrient and Water Management, Miss Lindsey Pease. And you've been given a presentation this whole week down here about what to do with your nutrients plan after you install tile.
Doctor.
Ooh, is it doctor?
It is.
I do have my PhD.
Nice. Well, I don't mean to slight
No,
you.
you're totally fine.
Good catch. You should probably get the university to put that on the webpage.
I have it right here.
Yeah, is it
Dr.
weird?
Lindsey Pease.
I will submit. Yeah.
Oh, just says Lindsay.
That is my department.
Uh-huh.
Wow.
Well, you've been busy. You've probably been one of the
Yes.
most attended sessions since all of them down here.
There has been just an absolutely great crowd. Both days, full room. I would say probably about 50 people each time I talked, which is awesome. I think that is, so it's been so much fun to be here at the Expo this year. I think, it's obviously the first time you guys are doing it, but, so much fun for me to be here.
How did you hear about the Expo?
So I was invited as one of the speakers. So way back in the summer, I'm pretty sure somebody saw my presentation that I was planning to give for the International Drainage Symposium, and they said, "Hey, that sounds like a really great talk that we should get for these drain contractors." And yeah, so then I was on the program, and I put it on my calendar, booked a flight, and here we are. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so first of all, let's tell our listeners, give them kind of an idea of what you do for your day job.
Yeah.
And then we'll get into the topic.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, as you mentioned, assistant professor and extension specialist, and basically what that looks like is I work and live in the Red River Valley of Minnesota. I am an employee of University of Minnesota, but they send me all the way up north at an outstate experiment station. We call these research and outreach centers.
Okay.
So, but basically what that means is that I get to live in the area that I am doing research.
Okay.
And work. And, that means I might run into people at the grocery store or, at Walmart that are the farmers that I am trying to help,
Right.
Which is a really awesome setup. And what that my job looks like, on a day-to-day basis, we are looking into different research strategies, drainage being a really big focus of how we're going to adapt some of these practices that are happening in other parts of the Midwest to the Red River Valley, which is, as everybody knows, it's cold. I am located an hour and a half north of Fargo, almost at the Canadian border. So we are really cold.
Yeah.
And we grow some slightly different crops. There is some corn and soybeans, but it's not all corn and soybeans. We also have a lot of spring wheat. Sugar beets are a big crop, and there's some dusting in there of potatoes, dry beans, sunflowers. We give kind of a little bit of everything.
Any canola?
Yes, canola too. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Nice.
It's a big variety.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so we're here to talk about, we know that in a majority of the instances, installing drainage tile in a farm improves productivity. Mm-hmm. Not only in Dave's case, improves value, but it improves productivity, which is also value to our listeners that are farmer operators. Mm-hmm. But there are some specific things that we should be doing in a field that has tile, whether it's patterned or a different configuration, to make sure we're maximizing the potential of this soil, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We, in this research comes from a project that I started really early when I started my position at the university. We actually took a field that had never had drain tile in it. It does have surface drains, but it had never had drain tile, and we did an installation at a field scale so that we could really get at this question you're asking, like, exactly. What do we do? What do we see changes in? How do we change the management? So we are, kind of learning and adapting in real time. And one of the things that you need to think about when you're adding tile in for the first time is you are adding a little bit more air in the soil profile. You're changing a little bit of what the microbes are doing, what they're eating, how they're metabolizing, and those little changes are going to affect the nutrient cycling, what's happening with the fertilizer you put on, so we've been doing a lot of intensive soil sampling, water sampling, and even air sampling to figure out, okay, so you put this fertilizer on, where does it go, and how is that different if in a drained field versus an undrained field?
How do you sample? You sampling air in the soil?
Yeah, so the way that you do it is it's actually pretty low tech.
Yeah.
You take low tech for the
Take a
collection
Walmart
part.
sack.
Yeah.
Capture it up.
Yeah. No, what we do, we have
It's a
like
Ziploc bag. Gotta be airtight.
yeah. You probably could actually take a sample with a Ziploc bag. I think it'd be
Okay.
interesting. I don't know how you'd keep it sealed, but anyway. But what we do is like a PVC pipe that you that we like pound into the ground, and then you have a lid that goes on top of it, and there's like a rubber septa that is in the lid, and you can take a syringe and put it through the septa and collect a sample of the air, and then we run that in the lab later on. And so you take a sample, right after you put the cap on, and then after 20 or 30 minutes, and then again after 45 minutes to an hour, and then that gives you a rate of how those concentrations of gases are changing. A lot of people do this for greenhouse gas analysis. In our case, we were actually looking at it to see, it tells us, different concentrations tell us, how happy the microbes are, like how active they are, if they have enough water, but also tells us if they have too much water, because they prefer to breathe. They prefer to respire carbon dioxide like all of us do. But if they're underwater or get too wet, then they'll start releasing other greenhouse gases, nitrous oxide and methane in particular. So, that's how we're measuring the air.
So how do they measure it? Parts per million?
Yeah, it comes out in parts per million. Yeah.
Gotcha. Wow.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, we have a big piece of equipment in our lab that we can bring these like vials back in and then just run it, and it reads out the concentration.
So after the farm, somebody puts tile in, you're testing the air to see how it might have changed it. What have you seen? Has it changed it? Like, has it?
So actually, so that is one of the things that we did see in the first couple years is that when you're looking at, the drained and the undrained section of the field, that undrained section, the original condition, is wetter, in the top of the soil profile. So those microbes, as I mentioned, they are actually releasing different gases. So you're releasing more nitrous oxide and more methane, and those are notable in terms of air quality, because those, when you're thinking of global warming and the potential for high concentrations of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, those gases count more. They're like, in an accounting sense, they're like worse than carbon dioxide. So it's actually seeing a little bit of a benefit in terms of those kind of gases coming out of the soil from drainage, which is like a great thing we've found already.
Right. So that's an environmental benefit.
Yeah.
But there's clearly an economical benefit to our listeners, the farmers.
Yeah.
And obviously you're able to tell that by testing and trapping the air. But what's the science behind what happens to the soil when it can properly be drained?
Yeah. So what's happening in the soil when it's drained is basically you are using the drains to work with gravity to just get rid of a little bit of extra water. It's actually not that much water. It seems like a lot of water, especially if you're watching a tile flowing. It seems like a lot of water coming out, but really the fraction that is being let out of the soil is pretty small. It's only a couple percentages, maybe 5% of the we call that the drainable porosity. Anything that can leave, if you were to take a slice of the soil, like a cake, right, and it just whatever would naturally fall out of that, that's all we're draining.
Taking what the soil can't hold.
Exactly, yeah. The soil would not hold it anyway. That's why you don't, but it just takes longer for it to drain down in our heavier clay soils, those heavier textured soils. So yeah, you're replacing that water with air, and then that gives, and then that again changes. It's kind of about changing the biology of what's happening from there. And the air is good for the crop roots. Obviously, they like to breathe. And
I kind of think of it from a farmer perspective as the soil's like a sponge.
Yeah.
And if you don't have the tile and you get 3 inches or 10 inches of rain and the soil's already saturated, it's got nowhere to go but run off. But if you're kind of getting that excess water out of that sponge, it can actually soak it up when it rains.
Yeah.
That's my
that is 100% correct. Yeah. And if you take a sponge, you dunk it in water, really saturate it, and just what's dripping out of the sponge, that's what you're draining. You're not rigging the sponge. That's, I think, one of the topics, we talked about this during this meeting, or myths about drainage. And a big myth about drainage is that it might over drain the soil. But it's not physically possible. It can't ring the sponge. You can't dry it out. You're just taking away that little bit of extra.
Right.
So are you guys testing the water coming out too?
Yeah, we are. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So are you seeing, that's been a big focus in a lot of ag, and in the ag city, kind of where people's food come from, nitrates in water coming down. Des Moines, we had a big lawsuit here and all that. Are you seeing negative effects from more tile to nitrates?
Can I rephrase that? Are you seeing evidence that there is more nitrates because of tile?
Yeah, so that can be it's a tricky question and a hard question, right? Because that is one of the pathways that we can lose nitrogen is in the water. And again, this water would be leaving the field anyway, but we are losing it a little bit quicker with the drainage. And that goes along with the nutrients that are dissolved in the water. So when you have tile drainage, it will be moving some of that extra nitrogen out with the drainage water. As far as the concentration goes, some of the ways that you can prevent that, I think that's one of those things. It's a known thing that you can lose some nitrates with the tile. But we have been spending a lot of time trying to think of strategies of how to minimize that, because not only is it bad, to see, especially with fertilizer prices the way they are, you don't want to lose that anyway. From a drinking water perspective or from any other perspective. It's about getting timing the application to when the crop is going to take it up. That's why we always try to push spring application or split plant, just those things that are a little bit harder as you're scheduling and you're planting, but they can help in terms of nutrient use efficiency. Now that's on the nitrate side. Yeah. But on the phosphorus side, what we actually see is that when that water is filtering through, that water usually has lower concentrations of phosphorus compared to surface runoff. So again, you're talking about that sponge effect, and then the soil having the ability to absorb instead of just running off the surface. That water that's running off the surface can carry a lot of soil with it.
This morning,
Yeah, it can carry a lot of soil, and then that soil can be holding a lot of phosphorus in it. Phosphorus is one of those nutrients that's really sticky, so it'll bind to the soil. And when you're draining, then you're actually moving that downward and giving it a chance to have more contact with a deeper part of the soil, so you actually lose less phosphorus when you are draining. So that's actually one of the flip side.
Question for you. You said when we're draining the excess off the sponge, we're replacing it with air.
Yeah.
Is there an opportunity to replace it with anything else?
Ooh, replace it with anything else. Like how do you mean?
Like anything that could be good. If I take something bad out of my schedule for the day, a bad habit, I might replace it with a good habit. Well, let's say we have excess water we remove. We have a void space there. Can we put more fertilizer? Can we put more something in the soil that would help?
Fertilizer's chemistry, and it has to attach to something. Right.
Yeah. So I think usually it is kind of a water, air, or soil kind of thing. So there's really kind of 3 buckets you can capture things in. I would think that having more air, you could probably collect. What could you collect? You might be able to collect some, more organic matter,
like a
in
mineral,
the top, maybe,
or
or mineral, or that's a really interesting question, and that's one that I hadn't really thought about before. I think it's a great question. I think
certainly wouldn't want to replace it completely because healthy soil needs a certain percentage of air.
Right.
The roots need air. The microbes are breathing oxygen. Right. So they need that.
But like being a paramedic, even when somebody's in trauma, traumatic injury or something, we start an IV. And when we start an IV, we'll put lactated ringers or normal saline, not blood. But it still works. But the difference between giving somebody actual blood and giving them normal saline, sugar water, the difference is blood can carry oxygen. So part of the reasons for shock, so I'm thinking shock to the soil, shock to the human body, is they're missing that oxygen carrying component through the vascular system. Well, if we got rid of the water, is that what is carrying all the everything there? You said it has to attach to it, or could we as scientists attach something to air that would be more beneficial to our soil? So just food for thought.
Here's what you could replace it with is roots. Right,
yeah.
The roots are going to have.
Actually, that is what you could replace it with.
The roots are going to have a least path of resistance to root better and go find more nutrients and.
Yeah, whether that's the growing crop, a cover crop, whichever. But I want to get back to the presentation that you've been mainly putting on down here. Is okay. We know that there's science changing. After we installed our drain tile, we know that the soil composition has a different makeup. So how do we know to make a fertilizer rec change or any type of a change to our agronomic program in the crop years following this? Is it just let's go take some soil samples? Or is there a better way to get a jump on maximizing the potential of your newly drained farm?
Yeah, so, So when we were looking at measuring all of these different pathways to get at the answer to that question. And, if we think about, we might be losing a little bit of the fertilizer in the water. We might be losing a little bit less in the air. We're kind of trying to like almost like a checkbook balance out. Then what's the crop itself is taking up. And we find that, and this is always the case, right? The crop is the one that's taking up the most. So we did see, we had one really wet year in 2020 and one really dry year in 2021. So in our really wet year, we ended up kind of, if you look at it a couple different ways, having about 25 pounds of nitrogen less left over in the soil after in our drained portion of the field compared to our undrained. So not a huge difference, but we also looked at, and then one of the ways we can calculate that is just with a regular soil nitrate test. Before the growing season starts, we would go out and take samples kind of right before planting, and we would check that out. The other way that we tried to calculate that different crediting system is with what's normally used in soil health is actually called the Haney test. That is another test that we use to see, is there a difference in crediting? And this again gets back into that soil chemistry. What are the microbes eating? How much are they eating? How happy are they? And that's what the Haney test is really traditionally used for, but you can use it to calculate nitrogen credits too, because they're going to be using some of that nitrogen and metabolizing it. So But looking at the Haney test, we didn't actually see in the first 2 years any difference in the credits based on the carbon pools themselves, which that is actually kind of an interesting result in and of itself, because we
Right.
sort of expected those carbon pools to change.
Yeah, I expected the shock factor.
So the
Yeah.
Haney test measures plant available
Yeah.
nutrients, right? So not your like acid tests like a Bray or like type that.
That's
So-
right, not an acid
So
test.
you saw nothing different in what's actually available to the plant.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah, which was a really surprising result to us. It changed, from season to season, but not necessarily the drained and the undrained condition. So,
Because I guess I would have expected it to shoot right up.
yeah.
Boom, we put more tile in this farm. We now have potentially more micronutrients available to the plant.
So now I'm wondering, as we're at a vendor conference here, and we say that it has a 15, they're signing right over there, it says 15% return on this. If we don't have more available stuff, how many years of trials does somebody do to have a good fact? To say that, hey, in these couple of years that we tested it, we didn't see anything, but they might be anomalies. Is it a 10-year process before we call it like this is good data? Like what's
Yeah.
the coefficient there?
Yeah, that is, again, one of the things that that you really do need a longer-term study to be able to say, pretty definitively what we're going to look at for this. And for a lot of our edge of field type research, when we're looking at a whole field scale and you can't really, divide it up into plots, I think you really need about 4 years of data to start to make sure you're catching, like I said, we've caught a wet year, we've caught a dry year. 2022 was a little in between, and then so after 2023, after this next year, then I'm going to start feeling a little bit more comfortable trying to switch up some of the practices and seeing like, okay, well now we have a baseline understanding of what happened in the first 4 years, but then what's going to happen after that?
Back to your 15% comment, whatever that number is, that's almost then essentially just the plant benefit of, one, not being drowned out in the field.
More roots.
But two, being able to have and establish a healthier plant. It's not necessarily getting access to more nutrients.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I was asking, can we fill that void? We had a partnership for a while, and we talked about biologics. Could we enter in, like you were doing test trials on your farm, Corey, could we enter in more biologics that we see those rates go up? She was talking about the gases in the soil. If the air is there, they're testing it with the PVC, they got the membrane on top. What if we entered in more biologics, and would that cause our gases to be different, and now there's more product for our crops, we get better yields?
I would say you are inherently doing that by draining. If you are creating a better environment for those microbes, they're going to
Without adding
reproduce.
another product.
And we all know that, just because you put nutrients on the soil doesn't mean it's going to get into the plant. You need those microbes in the soil to help, it's a symbiotic relationship between the plant and the root excavates and all that. So
Right.
you are adding more microbes.
Yeah, I think you are. You are, and the other thing, that might be happening too, that why we didn't see anything in the first couple of years is we do see those biological communities and these microbes. People who are studying that are seeing there's a little bit of a lag time between, and I think some of the biological products are people are kind of starting to notice the same thing too. It might not necessarily take in year one, but community, like the microbes are not that different than humans on kind of in some ways, of that they're slow to change, and they're slow to change to their environment. So I do think it is possible. We're going to keep doing this research. So that's just after 2 years, but we're going to keep looking at this over time to see if we can catch maybe a shift happening.
Because I fully expected, having not attended your session here, for you to come back and say, oh yeah, we need to completely change up your mix. We're going through a program right now focusing just on human diet and adjusting your protein and carbohydrate intake, let alone in the field. So we had a conversation with a couple of contracts down here about your presentation, and some stated that just due to maybe it was the better airflow or whichever it was, that they were able to reduce their inputs by a percentage, 15, 20, 30%, because their field drained better, or like I said, the microbes were more active. But it's not necessarily you're stating from a base level to change RECs. It's
Right.
still get your soil sample and monitor what's available.
Yeah, I think that really is the key is, you're going to make your best, most efficient decision by getting out and testing the soil, knowing what's there. And I know that's hard. And trust me, I've been out on plenty of freezing cold days soil sampling.
We just wanted a silver bullet.
Yeah, I know. And I always wish I could bring you a silver bullet. But I think that's true. And a lot of the nutrient management work is that yeah, it's these pools are really complex, and I think test your soil, apply. Yeah, I don't see a big need to change the fertility recommendations. There's kind of the maybe the disappointing, maybe not disappointing, and
No, it's valuable.
answer, but yeah,
Because that's an expectation our listeners need to have. If they're going to make a tiling decision, you may be able to change your fertilizer RECs, but that's not the sole basis of doing it. You don't go into a perfectly drained farm, add more tile to hopefully put in less fertilizer.
yeah. No, that's definitely true, and
What I'm kind of just thinking of like some of the areas on our farm that we need tile in, like the lower areas that are 3-4 years out of 5, like you don't get a crop, or if you do, it's like it's 200 bushels over here, and then it's 80 bushels. In a way, if you drain that area, those are usually the highest testing on our soil samples because we're not utilizing the nutrients that we've been applying.
For sure.
So you probably could get by with less on those areas
Right.
that
Yeah.
need it.
Yeah, and I think that is a good point too. You might be able to, those crops are growing, and they're growing a better yield, a more consistent yield. And even after 1 year, we saw a yield boost on our drained portion of the field. So that's higher yields, more organic matter. That I think it's funny because people do like to think about soil fertility on one side and then water management in another bucket, but the water is so critical a component of farming, and it is sometimes hard to keep in mind that if you can manage that water, that is gonna help you so much in a lot of different ways.
Do you have any kind of, for listeners, we have listeners from all over, some of them might have silty clay loams, some of them might have Webster clarions, Nicolettes, etc. in soils, and some of them might have sandy clay loam. The guys that are sandy and lighter soils are going to have a completely different ball game than maybe your test plots. So how is it? Does it have just as much of an effect on the good stuff as it does on the bad?
Yeah, I think probably when you're where you're going to see the most dramatic improvement or changes is going to be the heavier soils, because again it's how long do those soils normally sit and hold water before they start before they drain. And if you're on a sandier soil, those can be pretty flashy systems on their own. Like if you're in a really sandy, then you get a rainfall and it, what
Right.
it infiltrates is gone pretty quick, which is, I do think your mileage is going to vary depending on your soil texture. In where I'm at in the Red River Valley, we have a lot of farms that are clay for a couple layers, but then once you get maybe 2 or 3 feet down, you might see a lens of sand in there just because of the way the geology is in the area. It's all kind of sandwiched together, and so it's going to have an effect on how that water moves and where it wants to move.
I mean, her information is also really good because it's displaying that, we did our myth busting episode in December about do nitrates go quicker down the drain tile, or do the fertilizers that we put out disappear? And it's nice to see that it doesn't change.
Yeah.
Dictating that at least it still stays there. We were hoping maybe for a big aha moment of we can put less fertilizer out, but it's also good to know that we don't have to put more.
Absolutely. Yeah, we don't see any need for more fertilizer with our once you add drainage. Yeah.
Nice.
Have you started cutting back fertilizer in trials?
We haven't tried that yet, but I do think that would be a really interesting thing to start looking at. We actually have, in addition to our big drainage plots, which we've been talking about, we have some older drainage plots that actually have different drain spacings in them. Right now, we're sort of rotating through. I'm partnering with a plant pathologist, and we're looking at interactions between, plant disease and drainage, but on those other crops but I think that would also, I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, that would be a really great place to do something like that,
right.
A fertility trial with different drain spacings too.
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of talked about two things you're studying. One is how it affects the plants and the soil. Okay. The other one was almost, or what I heard, I guess, maybe I heard it wrong, but more of a global warming, like what is off-gassing and how is that changing? Mm-hmm. Okay. I had a question back 10 minutes ago on the global warming side of the world. Climate change. You have a PVC pipe that comes up and you're testing the air. Okay. In real estate, we have to disclose radon gas, colorless, odorless gas in houses. Some houses have it, some houses don't. Iowa's really known for radon gas, but one of the determining factors is, did it escape from the soil? Mm-hmm. Did it come up into your house? You're testing it out a test port that you made. How much of that's actually escaping anyway, though? So, the levels went up. More microbes are off-gassing methane, and now our levels went up. How much of that ever even reaches the air, though? You're testing it in a port that you're drilling down to where it's at. Does it ever escape?
So when we are setting this, we're actually not going very deep. We are kind of we are at the interface of where the soil is meeting the air. So that is
gotcha.
exactly.
I pictured 3 foot, 4 foot.
No, it's not that deep.
The tube's isolating what's being released from that square inch.
But you're not deep. Okay, I was thinking they were all the way down and it wasn't escaping the ground. Okay, fair enough.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Is there a play on carbon for this? Like, if the soil's saturated and it's putting off methane and greenhouse gases, but yet you tile, could that be part of your
carbon credit equation?
It really should be. I don't know, and every carbon crediting program is different, but this greenhouse gases and measuring those from the soil is actually, I think, a pretty understudied area in drainage. So there's not a ton of work out there that is looking at exactly that, but I do think you have the potential. You have to be including that as part of the overall equation.
Corey, you're so smart. SMRT. I mean SMART.
So smart.
I had one question, or not a question, just a comment on the nitrates going down from 10 minutes before, or maybe 15. If it's not drained, or if it's not tiled, and that soil is sitting there saturated and you got nitrogen in the soil, you're going to lose it anyway. It's just not going to end up in the drinking water. It's going to go up into the atmosphere.
Yeah,
right?
You're right. Yeah, no, you're exactly right. Yeah.
So I'd rather take my chances of it leaching down and hopefully connecting to another soil colloid and getting captured and then getting to the tile, rather than just sitting there and being gone completely.
Right, and
running off the surface.
Yeah, or running off the surface, and I think that is definitely something to keep in mind. And and we are having so many. There are a lot of options available. If you do see a lot of nitrates leaving in the water, and that can be really site specific. Things like wood chip bioreactors. Those are huge, especially in Iowa.
We had a couple
right
put in
now.
by our farm.
Yeah, wood chip bioreactors are one of those ways. It's you're just filtering it out, and it's a big expense, but again, that is an option.
So you got me thinking. We've talked about a couple different benefits that tile could. One, gets the water away, maybe more root system, displaces more air, etc. Room for other things to come in. Might help with gases. Might help with air. We know just from being at the conference here, guys, that tile helps. Okay, so tile helps. You have a PhD in this. What are we missing? What else? What are the other positive factors that nobody talks about?
Ooh, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I think what we haven't talked about really are some of the benefits of it. Lets you out on your field just a couple days sooner. Time. It saves you time. You aren't necessarily driving. If you are driving your planter on the field, when it's wet, you're compacting the soil. You're squishing that soil column down, and boy, that's creating a feedback loop, or then you might need more tillage. So drainage can be really one of those baseline factors that makes everything else a little bit easier. If you can plant a couple days earlier, then the crops will have a little bit warmer. They'll be a little bit warmer. Have a few more growing degree days. Actually, that is something that we haven't talked about too a lot, is the fact that when you don't have the water in the soil profile, that lets the air is warmer than the water. Just like if you think about, jumping in a lake, right?
Oh, sure.
So that keeps your seed a little bit warmer. And, we all know just those couple of degrees can make a difference by the end of the year.
Never even thought about that.
No, that's really good. Well, this has been a pleasure.
Yes.
We listeners, you don't know how hard we worked to get Dr. Lindsey here scheduled, not because of her, but because of our schedule down here. So we appreciate you sitting down and hanging out with us.
Oh, absolutely.
A question that you might not have expected is we ask the same question to every guest that we have on our podcast, and that changes quarterly, semi-annually, and the one that we're working on right now is, to you, what do you view as success?
It doesn't have to be related to farming. It could be anything in life.
Doesn't have to be related to tile. Just what does success look like to Dr. Lindsey? So as you think about that, we were here, again, Conservation and Drainage Expo down here in Des Moines, the North American one. First
Opposed
ever.
to the South American one?
Opposed to the South American one.
Opposed to the Brazil. Yeah.
If they want to invite us to come be masters of ceremonies for that, we would love to. But first ever, hopefully it will be a second. It sounds like there's already talks and discussions of another great event being put together. But we were here talking with Dr. Lindsey about what types of fertility requirements change after installing drain tile on a farm. And we learned that there isn't a magic, 30% reduction. I get to put 30% less fertilizer out there. There may
Not yet.
become that type, but just to automatically put tile on the ground, make a switch, the data isn't there. Not yet. But it's good to know that it also doesn't require more fertilizer. So it was kind of good to learn that what happens to the soil profile after we install our tile, how that affects the way our micronutrients are working together to help boost our yield, but ultimately the water wicking ability of the drain tile is what allows us to generate higher yields. So we had a really good conversation there. We know there's a lot of benefits to drain tile, which is why it's still one of our most downloaded conversations, and I'm sure this one will do just as well. But listener, that's what we were hanging out with today. That was a little stalling for you to determine what success looks like to you.
Yeah, I think that's such a great question and something that we don't think about as often as we should. But I would say, even just thinking about, across work, across personal things, if success for me is definitely trying to, leave others and other people a little bit better than I found them, helping people out, bringing a smile to somebody's face, helping somebody out. And I think that's a big theme of my, big benefit of my work is I get to do this great research and ask these questions and hopefully at the end of the day, answer questions, help people farm a little bit better, be good, better stewards of the land, just kind of all coming together and and just kind of success to me, doing my little part to make the world a better place.
And for those of you listeners that are not watching our YouTube channel, you have missed it. She talked about making people smile. I don't think we've ever had a guest that has smiled and answered every question throughout the entire podcast.
You got a good point.
Dr. Lindsey has a smile that is infectious, ladies and gentlemen. Watch it on YouTube.
Yes. No, this has been our pleasure. If people want to follow your research and what you're doing, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, I would say if you follow University of Minnesota Extension, a lot of my stuff gets posted there. We have a Minnesota Crop News blog that I write for, but you can also follow me on Twitter if you are still doing Twitter.
Oh, yeah.
At LPsUMN is my handle. Also we have a really great University Extension nutrient management team where where they will share all the work that we do, and they're really great at pushing us to get those things out to people.
Yeah. That's good. And make sure you write in when you find her profile to make sure her department puts Dr.
Yeah.
Lindsey in front of that.
Following.
Followed. Perfect.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you. Also, listeners, we appreciate you listening in as well. Thank you again. Send us your topics to farmforprofitllc@gmail.com. But until next time, have a good one.